Hey everybody, Brianne Callanan here. Tonight I wanted to go over a really important topic that I see a lot of the clients and patients who come to me suffering with this, and this is insulin resistance. So this sounds like maybe a hard to understand concept, but I'm going to break it down for you in this presentation. For those of you who are in the metabolic reset program, this is going to be important for you to understand because this is really what we're targeting in terms of optimizing your health and helping to optimize not only your weight, but also your hormones, your gut health, your overall health in general. Like I said, many people who come to see me do have insulin resistance, and we're going to break down this topic. What are the signs and symptoms? How do you know if you are suffering with this and what you can do about it? So first things first, I found this 2015 stat or this study that showed that nearly 50% of adults living in the United States have diabetes or pre-diabetes. Now, if you are in Canada, like myself, we're not much better. We are approaching this 50% mark as well, and this is from 2015. So you can imagine that things are getting worse, not better, as the years go on, and there's many reasons for that. In terms of what the heck does this have to do with insulin resistance? Well, insulin resistance is what often precedes the diagnosis of diabetes or pre-diabetes, and insulin resistance can be a significant issue in terms of those who are looking to obtain a lean body composition, as well as balance their hormones and improve their moods. We're going to talk about that as well. Now, if you think if you think of this in general, if 50% of the population is diabetic or pre-diabetes, that's ones that we know of. Those are individuals who have been diagnosed. There are many other individuals who have not yet been diagnosed. And because insulin resistance precedes this diagnosis, I can just imagine how many people who actually have insulin resistance that we're just not capturing because they have yet to be diagnosed. Now, what are the signs of insulin resistance? How do you know that you might be experiencing this? Well, there are many symptoms, and it presents differently in each individual. Many individuals with insulin resistance are fatigued. It relates to how your body is managing its blood sugar. So that can lead to things like anxiety. For individuals who have insulin resistance that has been going on for a long period of time, they're pre-diabetic or moving into diabetes, we can see increased thirst or hunger, as well as increased urination. Individuals with insulin resistance are also more susceptible to yeast infections and urinary tract disease. They have an impaired immune system because the sugar is so high in their blood, and we're going to talk about why that happens. We can also see individuals with PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome have higher levels of insulin or insulin resistance. Irregular cycles come with PCOS, as well as something called hirsutism, which is abnormal hair growth in women. So we might see hair growth on the upper lips, hair growth on the abdomen, acne, painful periods, as well as hair loss on the head in men and women. We can also see infertility and miscarriage, elevated levels of blood pressure. Of course, we're seeing blood sugar changes with insulin resistance, so higher levels of blood sugar or blood glucose, higher level of triglycerides, so moving into having higher levels of cholesterol as well, maybe requiring the need of cholesterol support, such as a statin medication. Weight loss resistance is a big one, especially when it comes to carbohydrates. Carbohydrates get a bad rap, which we're going to talk about. Carbohydrates are not necessarily bad. I like individuals to consume all types of foods, all food groups. They don't like to completely remove anything, but if you're experiencing insulin resistance for a set period of time, it might be beneficial for you to reduce the amount of carbohydrates or sugars in your diet. I'm going to talk about some of those things and strategies that you can use, as well as weight gain around the midsection. So a waistline over 40 inches in men and over 35 inches in women. Now, having all of these symptoms can increase your risk of consequences like heart attack and stroke and cardiovascular disease. So this is something really important that we want to address. And the great news is it's often reversible with diet, lifestyle, sometimes supplements, sometimes medications are required. Another really interesting aspect of insulin resistance is the impacts on the skin, which I want to highlight. Individuals can experience acne, and this is because when you have higher levels of insulin, it causes more oily skin, and then the bacteria can feed off of that oil and produce acne. HS is another condition that some of my patients will experience. Skin darkening, especially in the creases, often around the neck. Skin tags, so many individuals who join the Reset program or we're specifically addressing insulin resistance, we see that improve, as well as specific types of hair loss. So if you have the insulin resistance, which is then going in to impact your hormones, specifically the balance between estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone in women, that can cause hair loss on your head. So you have more hair on the upper lip, more hair on your abdomen, but you lose the hair on your head, specifically starting at the scalp and moving back, more of that classic male pattern hair loss. Now, what is the risk of not addressing insulin resistance? Well, because insulin resistance precedes prediabetes and diabetes, you are at increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This can lead to issues like kidney damage, peripheral neuropathy, which is tingling in your fingers and your toes. Diabetes have issues with their eyesight potentially, kidney health, mentioned that one twice, as well as cardiovascular disease, heart and stroke. So this is something that we do want to take seriously and we do want to reverse as quickly as possible. So what is insulin resistance? What is blood sugar? I've put together some pictures here to help you understand what's going on. So specifically when you eat carbohydrates, anything that contains a carbohydrate or a sugar, it doesn't have to be just fruit. It could be pastas and desserts, breads. It could be crackers and chips. Anything that contains carbohydrates that will be broken down into glucose or sugar will raise your blood sugar. So you eat the food, you digest the food, you break it down into glucose, and then all of a sudden there's more glucose. These little red squares here are glucose in the bloodstream. Then what happens is your pancreas will release insulin. And this is what the keys are here. And what these keys do, or what the insulin does, is it binds to the cells and it opens the cells up so the sugar, the fuel, the glucose can get into the cell. Now this is important because your cells need energy to work properly. Your brain cells need energy to focus and concentrate. Your muscle cells need energy to work. Now, what happens in insulin resistance? So this is the normal response. When you consume carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up, your pancreas spits out these keys or insulins, the cells open up, and then your cells are happy. They get the sugars. That's exactly what should happen. Now, over time, if you over-consume carbohydrates, you over-consume sugars, or there are other things that can raise sugar, such as prolonged stress, not only mental emotional stress, but also stress of things like nutrient deficiencies, or stress of being dehydrated, stress of being sleep deprived, stress of environmental toxins, or having to detoxify additional things in your environment, or pharmaceuticals. Anything like that can create issues with your blood sugar. You know, stress dumps blood sugar that's stored in your liver into the bloodstream so that you can fight or flight, so you have the energy to run away or fight. That's exactly what happens in our stress response. Now, if that's prolonged over time, essentially these keys, or the insulin getting into the cell, becomes clogged. So you can think of it as clogged, or your key's kind of jammed and you can't open that lock and key mechanism. Now this is a problem. So if we go back to this picture, if these keys can't open the cells, what happens is the sugar remains in the blood. And that's why your blood sugar goes up. Now, why are you tired? Well, because that sugar is not getting into the cell. So those cells can't have the energy that they need to thrive. So your cells are feeling like they're starving, even though there's ample fuel around in the bloodstream. That's where we can get some cravings for high fat, high sugar foods, because your cell is cellularly, your body's interpreting this as starving. So here, normal insulin mechanism, right? The glucose, insulin, they binds to the cell, and we get sugars entering into the cell. Now in insulin resistance, we see that the blood sugar remains high, and within the cells, there's not a lot of sugar there. And then this is what we see. So in a normal individual, you eat your foods, your blood sugar goes up, Then it goes down because all of that sugar is getting within your cells because that lock and key mechanism is working. Now, individuals with insulin resistance, we still see a response, but the response, it takes a lot more insulin to be able to produce that. And as a result, insulin's high, blood sugar's high as we go towards the end. Now, these big swings up and down in blood sugar can trigger shakiness, anxiety can happen because essentially your blood sugar is just swinging up and down and up and down. Now, when your blood sugar is high and your insulin's high, insulin is a fat storage hormone. So it's going to be really challenging to lose weight no matter what you eat if this is what's going on. And it's going on for 50% of the US population at least. So again, here's what should happen. You eat sugar, the pancreas releases insulin to drive down the blood sugar because you always want to maintain a healthy, stable level of blood sugar. Here is a really nice graph of what happens in an individual who is insulin resistant. So this is something that we actually measure on blood work. If you've ever been pregnant and you drank the orange drink that contains 75 grams of glucose, then you hung out at the lab for a whole bunch of time and they measured your blood sugar, that's because they're trying to measure your response. They want to know when you drink the sugar, how high does your blood sugar go? How long does it stay high? How high does your insulin go as a response? And when does your insulin go down? So for individuals with a normal response, that's the dotted line here. So you should consume your sugars, blood sugar will go up, your insulin will rise, and your blood sugar will come back down. This is why individuals who are pre-diabetic, we have them monitor their blood glucose fasting, so we want to know the baseline. And then oftentimes we'll recommend that they measure their blood sugar 1 hour and 2 hours after to make sure that it's come down into the normal range. Now, individuals with insulin resistance, what happens is their blood sugar goes up, their insulin goes up, because we're talking about insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes, not type 1. It's a little bit different. So in type 2, blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, but the keys holes are jammed. So your pancreas is like, what the heck, has to produce more and more insulin. More and more insulin. Eventually it does come down, but it takes longer. Now, as the state of the condition progresses and progresses, as you can see here in the red and the purple line here, insulin continues to go up. Insulin should come back down, right? It should be back here, almost close to baseline at that 2 hour mark. But in insulin resistance, it's still remaining elevated. If your insulin remains elevated long term, that's more exposure to that fat storage hormone. So you can see it doesn't matter what you eat. You could eat the exact same amount of carbohydrates as someone else, but your response is much different. And the result of the response is going to be much different. So this comes down to the concept of eat less, exercise more. It's not what you eat, it's how your body responds to it. So if you have a normal insulin response, carbs are fine. If you have this exaggerated insulin response, you are going to have a harder time processing that sugar for energy, for fuel. It's going to sit in your blood longer, more likely to gain weight, more likely to stimulate your ovaries to produce those androgens. Now you have the acne, hair loss on the head, you have issues with your menstrual cycle. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is what we're seeing here as well. Okay, all right. So what do we typically see on blood work in insulin resistance? So here is blood work from a patient of mine. We're seeing insulin levels are high here, 221. This is a fasting result. In addition to the high levels of insulin, we're also seeing higher levels of blood sugar, a 6.0. High insulin should bring down your sugar. Insulin, remember, is that key that brings all the sugar from the blood into the cells. So if this patient was responding appropriately, they should have low blood sugar because their insulin is so high. Most commonly, traditional blood work is not measuring fasting insulin. All they're probably measuring for you is this fasting glucose and the hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C tells us how you've been managing your blood sugar over 120 days or 3 months. So the point of emphasizing this is if we didn't run this fasting insulin, if we only ran the hemoglobin A1C and the fasting glucose, we would say hemoglobin A1C is a 5.6. Yeah, you might be a little bit at risk of prediabetes. We'll just watch you. Typically, there's no dietary recommendations at this point in time, and the patient goes home. Now, this is a missed opportunity to address this insulin resistance. Eventually, what will happen is this hemoglobin A1C will continue to rise. The patient will become pre-diabetic and eventually could develop type 2 diabetes as well. This is where we typically want to intervene right away. So I run a full panel where we look at everything so we can understand what's going on. This patient also had higher levels of cholesterol. So this, when we see higher levels of cholesterol, when we see weight gain around the midsection, when we see changes to blood sugar, this is what is called metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is just all those kind of grouped into one, and they often come together. So this patient, you know, might have been told, we'll just monitor, right? Yeah, you've got higher levels of cholesterol. We'll just monitor and see, come back next year. This is a key time where we really need to intervene. We need to address that insulin resistance so the cholesterol panel can get better as well. Again, if this is not addressed, the individual is going to be predisposed to weight gain. It's going to be really challenging for them to have good energy levels because remember that glucose isn't getting into the cells. They're going to be fatigued, mood changes. They're really not going to have good brain power in terms of glucose reaching the cells in the brain, and quality of life is going to be impacted, increased risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke, which we don't want. This individual as well had higher levels of inflammation. So this is HSCRP. This individual is actually in the high risk category for cardiovascular disease. Now, when I see high levels of inflammation, this is also associated with something called leptin resistance, which we may go in deeper in a completely other training. But leptin tells our brain to stop eating. It's our satiety signal. Individuals who have high levels of inflammation also have issues with leptin. So they have a really hard time getting that signal to the brain to say, we're full, reduce appetite. So these individuals who are working with me or who are on the reset program, we really want to follow up closely in maintenance. We really want to continue to check in because we do know that there is increased risk of these individuals being hungrier. This predisposes them to gain the weight back. So one of the things I often recommend for individuals who have higher levels of inflammation, one, we want to address it and get it down and confirm later on that it's actually gone down. But oftentimes I recommend continuing with a support that helps with satiety. And traditionally what I'm using is a certain type of fiber called glucomannan because it promotes satiety, it's great for bowel movements, and it's also been shown to lower cholesterol. The other thing I wanted to point out here is this individual had lower levels of sex hormone binding globulin. This is a protein, it's kind of like a catcher's mitt that binds onto hormones and makes them inactive. If you have too much testosterone, too many androgens, and you've got the acne, the hair loss, the hair growth, polycystic ovarian syndrome, if you don't have enough of that catcher's mitt to bind onto those hormones and render them inactive, it can make those symptoms worse. We also see lower levels of sex hormone binding globulin in individuals with insulin resistance. And we do see when using key strategies to address the insulin resistance that this sex hormone binding globulin improves. Now you're better able to bind up those androgens, so the acne is better, you're not losing hair on your head, and you're not seeing the facial hair on the upper lip. Many individuals who are struggling with weight loss resistance, they often jump first to wondering if their thyroid function is okay. It's not always thyroid function. Typically, in my experience, I find low functioning thyroid responsible for maybe 5 to 8 pounds of weight loss, not 40 pounds. It can definitely be a factor. We want to make sure to run a full thyroid panel to make sure the thyroid's not contributing to the overall picture, but it's not always the culprit. We need to look at insulin, sex hormone binding globulin, inflammation, blood sugar, the ones that we already reviewed. In addition, vitamin D. We know I'm in Ontario, it's not very sunny here in the wintertime. Many individuals in Canada especially are deficient in vitamin D. This vitamin D level is very, very low. I like to see it anywhere from 100 to 150 in my practice. Vitamin D can play a critical role in insulin resistance as well. So the point is that it's not just what you eat when you eat it and why you're eating those foods and how you're pairing those foods, but it's also looking at other factors that can make what you're eating, the body's hormonal response, less than ideal. Vitamin D is going to be one that can increase your risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome. So if you have insulin resistance, you want to know where your vitamin D is because we want to support that. Ideally, we would just get sun exposure, but if sun obviously is not always feasible for individuals in the wintertime, we may want to consider supplementing. Now, I like to test vitamin D because it helps us determine what the appropriate dose would be for you. You can overdo vitamin D. Not everybody's deficient in vitamin D. Lots of individuals are, and testing can really help us know how much to take. And then really important to test after to know, is this getting better? Is your vitamin D coming up? Do we need to adjust the dose here and there? Okay, how does insulin resistance develop? So we talked about the overconsumption of carbohydrates. Stress is a big factor. Nutrient deficiencies, and I'm actually going to add here poor gut health, because this can be another factor that predisposes you to having insulin resistance. So it's not just about what you eat, it's about how you're eating, the nutrients that you have, how is your gut health, how are you digesting those nutrients, and how are the signals being relayed. Here's a diagram just of the impacts of stress. And what I want to emphasize is it's many individuals will say to me, well, I'm not stressed. I don't feel stressed. I feel like I'm managing okay. Mental emotional stress is just one aspect of stress. Chronic infections can lead to increased stress in the body. Poor nutrition, pain, so having muscle pain, joint pain can contribute to stress. Of course, there's a psychological stress. High blood sugar in itself is a stress in the body. Inflammation, toxicity, all of that, lack of sleep, dehydration, poor immune function, poor gut health, all of that leads to stress overall in the system. This is a really interesting slide where I want to go into the aspect of why making sure you have good vitamin and minerals is key for a good blood sugar signaling, good relationship between how much your blood sugar is rising, is your insulin rising to meet it, is your blood sugar coming down. If you have inappropriate levels of minerals, if you have iron deficiency, if you're not having enough zinc in your diet, selenium, antioxidants, a diet rich of fruits and vegetables, what happens is this leads to stress in the system. It's called oxidative stress. And this oxidative stress impairs the insulin response and can increase your risk. This here is one of my favorite pictures, and I want to break it down in a really simple way. This is the Krebs cycle. So once that glucose gets into the cell, within your cell are more cells called mitochondria. And these mitochondria are responsible for taking the carbohydrates here, so your blood sugar, spinning this wheel and producing ATP or energy. Also responsible for taking fats, stored fats or fats in your diet, spinning them through the cycle. Most individuals, their reason for coming to see me and working with myself or my team, it's all about really having enough energy, getting through your day with confidence, showing up and achieving what you want, showing up and being the person that you want to be for yourself and others. Oftentimes, energy is a really big want for a lot of my clients. And what we want to do is we want to spin this cycle as fast as possible. Now, for individuals with insulin resistance, they have a harder time getting the sugars into the cells and burning them as energy. Oftentimes, they're missing key vitamins, like you can see here, it's a little bit small, but B vitamins. Mg here is magnesium. We recommend the Relax and Focus. I love that. It's high in magnesium, helps with this cycle. The other one here, and I talked about this recently on my Instagram, Fe is iron. So if you don't have enough iron, you can't spin this cycle, you feel tired. In green here, these ones are amino acids. These come from proteins. Oftentimes, I recommend individuals consume extra amino acids because amino acids not only help spin the cycle, but carnitine here, which helps to pull fats into the cycle and burn them as energy. We need things like leucine, lysine, and methionine to help pull this into the cycle so it spins really fast. The faster we can get this spinning, the better you're going to feel from an energy perspective, mental clarity perspective. You're going to burn your own fats for fuel. Blood sugar is going to be stable. You're going to be able to fast for prolonged periods of time without feeling hungry. Most individuals who have extra weight that their body can tap into, but they say they don't feel well with intermittent fasting, or they think, you know, oh man, I couldn't skip a meal. That's because your body can't tap into its own fat stores to burn this. Oftentimes, because you just don't have enough amino acids or B vitamins, the cycle is stuck and it needs to spin faster. This is from a research article that I recently ran. Specifically, I wanted to zone in here on iron. I see iron deficiency so commonly in my practice. Many individuals say, you know, I'm tired, I'm sluggish, I have brain fog, heavy menstrual cycles, hair is falling out, I have weight loss resistance, I just don't have the motivation to do anything or exercise or cook. And I say, well, your iron's low. Yeah, but it's always been low. I cannot stress enough the importance of iron. Don't downplay iron. Again, it's so important for this Krebs cycle. Low iron needs to be addressed. And not only does it need to be addressed, you need to take high enough dosages, and then you need to follow up to see if your iron has come back up. In addition, we need to know what's the cause. Is it because you're not getting enough in your diet? Is it because you're not absorbing what you are consuming in your diet? Is there chronic infections? Do you have heavy menstrual cycles? Why is it that your iron is low? Deficiency actually has been shown to impair glucose metabolism. So you're not going to be able to control your blood sugar as well if you're deficient in iron. There's that anxiety up and down. Individuals with iron deficiency can also experience palpitations, shortness of breath, cravings for things like ice or even dirt or gravel. So it can't be downplayed. Again, why are you having resistant weight loss? Why are you having low energy if your iron's low? Because you can't take carbohydrates and push them through this cycle. So it's really, really important. The other thing with iron is high levels of iron in animal studies has been shown to cause oxidative stress. And oxidative stress, if you can remember, increases risk of insulin resistance diabetes. Oxidative stress slows down this cycle. Why am I saying this? Well, because it's not about just taking high doses of iron forever. If you're taking too much iron when you don't need it and you're not having appropriate follow-up to figure out, is your iron improving? Where are you at? Do you need more? Do you need less? If that's the case, then this cycle's not going to spin as well either. So you really need to know you don't want too high of iron, but you also don't want too low. This is a urine test that you can actually do to know where your vitamins and minerals are. This is an organic acid test, often really, really helpful because it tells you where are your B vitamins, where is your magnesium, zinc. So these are all the nutrients that help spin that Krebs cycle. So you can see here, organic acids can give you an idea of, is there any place in this cycle where you're getting stuck? That way we can say, okay, you specifically need these Bs, or you specifically need magnesium, or you specifically need carnitine, etc. This will also show your distributions of healthy fats. Do you need more omega-3s, omega-6, omega-9s? And it can also tell you what specific amino acids that you might be deficient in. And then we can really tailor and customize to you. This was the post that I recently posted on my Instagram talking about why low iron is a big deal. So check that out. We talked about it in the previous slides. But iron is really important for making your thyroid hormone, which again can control your metabolism. It's not the sole piece for weight loss resistant, but is an important piece, especially for energy and mental clarity, good hair growth. Iron is important for converting amino acids, tyrosine to dopamine. What the heck does that mean? Well, if you don't have enough dopamine, that's your motivation hormone. It's going to be really hard for you to want to cook good, healthy meals, move throughout the day, and do any exercise if you have low motivation. Iron helps us carry oxygen around our body. So if you don't have enough oxygen to your brain, you're going to have brain fog, fatigue, low motivation, slow metabolism. Iron deficiency, again, has been shown to impair that glucose metabolism. So that's what we talked about in terms of the Krebs cycle and taking carbs and fats and spinning them through for energy. This is actually a snippet from that urine test that I chatted about. You can also on this urine test choose to measure heavy metal exposure. And the thing here, what we can see these red ones, these are things that are inhibiting or slowing down the cycle. So not only do we need these green ones, your B vitamins, your magnesium, your zinc, your iron, not only do we need those to spin the cycle, but we also might want to consider testing, is there anything that's inhibiting this cycle in terms of exposures to things like fluoride or mercury on a regular basis? That can definitely slow down the cycle. Now, how do you address insulin resistance? If you feel like this is something that could be impacting you, again, at least 50% of the population in the United States. Canada is very, very similar. At least 50% of the individuals are experiencing this. So this would be something to consider. We want to remove things that are going to further raise blood sugar. This is not forever. This is not that you can never have sugar. It's not that you can never have your chocolate or your wine or your desserts and things like that. It's not forever. But again, if we looked at, remember that chart where the glucose went up and went down, the insulin went up and went down. If we can get you back to the response where you fall into the normal response, you can definitely tolerate these things better. But temporarily, we want to remove sugar. Temporarily, we want to reduce snacking, because remember, individuals with insulin resistance, their insulin goes up and it stays up. It's going to take longer for it to come down. So we want to avoid those snacks. We don't want you going up, snacking every couple hours. I also recommend removing dairy. It's not that dairy is quote unquote bad. It's not that everybody is sensitive to dairy and you have to be gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, egg-free, nut-free, alcohol-free. No, that's not the case. Some people are sensitive to dairy. Some people have lactose intolerance, but this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about temporarily removing dairy, because dairy can contribute to increased insulin resistance because it has a high insulin index. The proteins, the branched chain amino acids in dairy really does raise insulin quite high. So temporarily, I would recommend, until we at least get that insulin resistance down, removing dairy completely. We want to find what your unique food sensitivities are. Everybody might have something different. So we recommend removing foods for a period of time and then reintroducing them one by one to test them out so we know specifically what you're sensitive to. Some people are sensitive to strawberries. Some people are sensitive to tomatoes. Some people are sensitive to mangoes or tomatoes. I don't know if I said that one, or strawberries, things like that. So everybody has something different, which we work one-on-one with clients, monitoring their food logs daily and reviewing them with you one-on-one weekly to find what food sensitivities are at play potentially for you. We want to remove artificial sweeteners, and we want to replace sleep, optimize sleep. That helps with the stress response. Work on stress management. We want those vitamins and minerals. You might need more to support that cycle temporarily. You need protein, vegetables, fiber. We need you to move, but not overdo exercise, because that raises inflammation. So also negatively impacts leptin resistance, so you're hungrier. It can also create changes with your stress response, more weight gain around the midsection. I love exercise, but we want to get your hormones in check first. Also consider adding things like cinnamon, flax seeds, dark chocolate, but not too dark. I recommend 65% or lower. Too much can create inflammation, especially in the gut if it's too dark of chocolate. And we want to add healthy fats, especially ones that we know that you tolerate well. We might also consider supporting blood sugar with additional supplements, depending on where this insulin resistance is, how far progressed it is. Sometimes I use things like inositol, ALA, chromium, berberine, because that helps with blunting that insulin response and keeping blood sugar down. I hear my dryer and I know it's not going to stop, so I'm going to wrap this up quite quick. And then we want to specifically improve gut bacteria. So there is some rat studies where they took the feces of an obese rat, transferred it into the lean rat. That lean rat didn't change its diet or exercise, but all of a sudden it became obese. And this is because the wrong type of bacteria will cause you to absorb more calories from the foods you eat, more likely to gain weight, more insulin resistance, and increased levels of inflammation. So in the reset program, we optimize this, and with many of my patients, I'm recommending a probiotic that optimizes this aspect. Now, what to look for? You want to look for a probiotic that's high in bifidobacterium, not lactobacillus. Many ones that you can get over the counter have too much lactobacillus and don't help you in this regards. Here's a case. This individual, interestingly enough, their hemoglobin A1C was 5.3. This puts them in the normal range. So if they didn't measure their fasting insulin, they would say, no, you're not at risk of prediabetes. You're good. Your blood sugar is amazing. Well, the blood sugar is only amazing because the insulin has to work so hard. The body is overproducing insulin just to keep it at a normal range. This is not normal. Individuals with insulin this high fasting will struggle with weight loss resistance. So this individual, the first round of the metabolic reset program, they lost 20 pounds and they maintained that weight for 4 weeks. So I always recommend we only lose weight for 6 weeks. If you lose weight for too much longer, it does start to impact your thyroid function. We do 6 weeks of losing, then we teach you how to maintain it. That's the most important part. Many individuals can, and they have on their own lost weight, but it came back. So that's why I'm very passionate about that maintenance phase. Then this individual did a second round, and what we saw here is their fasting insulin is still high. So remember, it was 203 to start. Now it went down to 123. So we're seeing improvements, but what I want to emphasize here is it takes time, right? We ideally want the fasting insulin under 40. So we still have a ways to go here. Once you get, some momentum with reducing your insulin levels, it does pick up. So I'm confident that this individual will continue to have this insulin levels go down because we are doing intermittent fasting. We are modifying the carbohydrates in the diet. We are using key supplement support to lower blood sugar, but we do have some room to work on. We also know that individuals who have this higher levels of insulin have increased susceptibility to the weight returning because insulin is a fat storage hormone. So for this individual in the maintenance plan, we want to be cautious temporarily the amount of carbohydrates we're adding back in for this individual. Subsequent rounds, subsequent testing, as we continue to test this and insulin goes down and down and down, then we'll encourage more and more carbohydrates. We'll encourage also doing some movement and sort of exercise to further improve this. This test here, we actually had the patient consume the glucose, measured their blood sugar and blood insulin an hour and 2 hours later, and this is what we're seeing here. So ideally, we want this fasting under 40, and 1 to 2 hours, we want it under 200-ish, 250 to 200. And you can see this individual's at 949 and 1338. So that's a really high response, right? So at this 2-hour mark, insulin is still going up. So I just want to go back to this page here. This individual is in this purple red area. Their insulin is still going up. It should be almost back down to the normal range at that 2-hour mark. So this is something that we're going to continue to work on. We're going to continue to monitor, and reducing weight, continuing with maintaining that weight, this individual will be on a great trajectory to keep that weight off. Here's another case. This individual did actually have some issues with their thyroid function. Their TSH was high. We were able to reduce it. We do still have some room to go. Their hemoglobin A1C, so this is the marker of, are they at risk of prediabetes? How are they managing their blood sugar over 3 months? It went from the at risk of prediabetes down to the normal range, which is good. Look at the cholesterol here. Triglycerides went from 4 to 1, and the cholesterol went from 6 to 4. So this is a really big improvement, just emphasizing how important key lifestyle strategies are and supplementation is to keep this nice and low. All right. Oh, and the other thing that was really nice here, HDL is a marker of good cholesterol. We actually saw the good cholesterol go up. This is not always common. What I see in the reset program is we effectively lower triglycerides, we lower cholesterol, but sometimes that good cholesterol does actually go down in the 6 weeks when we're losing, but it does come back up in the maintenance phase. But this individual was able to actually raise it, which is fantastic. Case 3, this individual, we worked on iron. right? So you might not have ever had your iron checked or discussed in terms of a nutrition plan or a health optimization plan or a weight loss plan, but it's really important for reasons that we spoke of. So this individual, their ferritin, this is a marker of stored form of iron, went from 13 to 54 in 6 weeks, which is great. A little bit of a ways to go, but this is a much, much better number. We also saw triglycerides go down, cholesterol go down. And again, here's a classic one where the HDL went slightly down, not too concerning. Insulin fasting went from 77 to 21. So this case didn't have as high of insulin as the previous patient, but we did see it go down to 21. Now, 20 to 40 is where we want. So this individual, we did overshoot it slightly. So this is a classic case of let's incorporate some carbohydrates. Let's open up your feeding window. Let's add more snacks in because you are in a perfect metabolic place to do that. And inflammation here went from the high risk category or moderate risk category all the way down to 0.877. So this individual is going to have a way easier time managing their satiety signals, and the weight is less likely to come back, which is fantastic. So that wraps up the presentation. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions about insulin resistance, please let me know. If you have recommendations for future topics, let me know. I'm happy to do that as well. I'm going to figure out why I have a visitor, why they're not in bed, and I hope you have a fantastic evening, and we'll talk soon.